The executive conference room at Donovan Technologies was exactly how I remembered it from childhood. Cold, modern, and designed to intimidate. Glass walls on 3 sides, a marble table that seated 20, and leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I sat at the far end near the door in the spot usually reserved for interns taking notes. My father, Marcus Donovan, stood at the head of the table in his signature navy suit, his presence commanding every inch of the room. At 62 he still had the build of the college linebacker he'd once been and the personality to match. When Marcus Donovan spoke, people listened. When he decided something, it happened. Today he'd decided to restructure the company. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Dad said, his voice carrying that blend of authority and charm that had built a tech empire. "I've called this meeting because Donovan Technologies is at a critical juncture. We've been coasting on legacy products for too long. Our competitors are innovating while we're maintaining. That ends today." Heads nodded around the table. VP of Operations Sandra Kemp leaned forward attentively. Chief Technology Officer Raymond Pierce adjusted his glasses. Marketing Director Jennifer Walsh had her tablet ready, already taking notes. "I've been reviewing our organizational structure," Dad continued, clicking to a presentation slide showing the company hierarchy. "And I've identified significant inefficiencies. Positions that exist out of tradition rather than necessity. People who draw salaries without contributing proportional value." He paused, letting that sink in. "My father built this company on merit," Dad said. "When you performed, you advanced. When you didn't, you were gone. Somewhere along the way we got soft. We started keeping people around for the wrong reasons. Loyalty, history, sentiment. That's not business. That's charity." Sandra Kemp nodded vigorously. "The market doesn't reward sentiment." "Exactly," Dad said. "Which is why, effective immediately, we're implementing a comprehensive performance review. Every position will be evaluated based on quantifiable metrics. Revenue generation, cost savings, strategic value. If you can't justify your salary with numbers, you're gone." I kept my expression neutral, my notepad open in front of me. I'd learned years ago that reacting only made things worse. "Now, I know what some of you are thinking," Dad continued. "Marcus, doesn't this create instability? Won't people be worried about their jobs?" He smiled. "Good. They should be. Comfortable employees are complacent employees. Fear drives performance." Raymond Pierce cleared his throat. "What about departments that don't directly generate revenue? Engineering, will be evaluated on innovation output and patent generation," Dad interrupted. "I'm not saying we only value sales. I'm saying everyone needs to prove their worth. Including family." The room went very still. Dad's eyes landed on me, sitting quietly at the end of the table. "My son Alex has been with the company for 5 years. Started right after college, which many of you know. He works in our strategic development department, which sounds impressive until you ask what strategic development actually means." A few awkward laughs rippled through the room. "Alex's department was created to give him a place in the family business," Dad said bluntly. "Because that's what fathers do, we try to help our children. But I've reviewed the numbers, and strategic development has cost this company $2 million in salary and overhead over 5 years. The return? 3 proposals, none of which were implemented. 0 patents. 0 revenue. 0 measurable impact." I felt 20 pairs of eyes on me. I kept my pen moving across the notepad, writing nothing in particular. "This is exactly the kind of dead weight I'm talking about," Dad continued. "We created a department because I felt obligated to give my son a job. Not because the company needed it. Not because Alex had earned it. That's charity, not business." Jennifer Walsh looked uncomfortable. "Marcus, isn't strategic development about long-term planning? That's hard to quantify in 5 years." 5 years is an entire business cycle," Dad cut her off. "In 5 years our competitors have launched new product lines, entered new markets and doubled their valuations. What has strategic development done? What has my son accomplished beyond collecting a paycheck?" He pulled up another slide showing my department's budget versus output. The numbers were damning when presented that way. All cost, no obvious return. "I'll tell you what he's accomplished," Dad said. "He's proven that nepotism doesn't work. That giving someone a position because their family is bad business. And that's a valuable lesson actually. one that informs our entire restructuring. Sandra Kemp seized the opportunity. I've always believed merit should be the only factor in advancement. No offense, Alex, but your father's right. Strategic development hasn't delivered results. None taken, I said quietly. Dad's eyebrows rose slightly. He'd expected more resistance. See? Even Alex understands. He knows he hasn't earned his position. That's honest, at least. So what's the proposal? Raymond Pierce asked. Strategic development is eliminated, Dad said. Effective end of quarter. The budget gets reallocated to R&D and sales, where it can generate actual returns. Alex will have the opportunity to interview for open positions in other departments, same as any external candidate. No special treatment. If he's qualified, he'll earn a spot. If not, he'll need to find opportunities elsewhere. I kept writing, my hands steady. That's the principle we're applying company-wide, Dad continued. No more sacred cows. No more untouchable positions. I don't care if someone's been here 30 years or if they're my own son. Results matter. Performance matters. Everything else is sentimentality, and sentimentality kills companies. What about the optics? Jennifer Walsh asked carefully. Firing the founder's son sends a message, but is it the message we want? It's exactly the message we want, Dad said firmly. It shows we're serious. That not even family gets special treatment. That Donovan Technologies is entering a new era of accountability. He looked around the table. Any questions? Timeline? Sandra asked. Performance reviews start next week. Decisions finalized within 30 days. Restructuring complete within 60. We move fast and decisively. Board approval? Raymond asked. Dad waved dismissively. I control 51%. My wife Helen holds another 12. We've discussed it, she's on board. That's 63%, more than enough to approve any structural changes. What about other shareholders? Someone asked. Minor stakes, Dad said. Legacy investors, employee stock options, that kind of thing. Nothing significant. Nothing that affects decision-making authority. He clicked to the final slide. A new organizational chart with several departments eliminated or consolidated. Strategic development was gone completely. My name wasn't anywhere on the chart. This is our future, Dad announced. Lean, efficient, performance-driven. Questions? Sandra Kemp practically glowed. I think it's bold and necessary. Companies that don't evolve die. Agreed, said Raymond. Though I'd like to review the R&D allocation numbers more carefully. Of course, Dad said. But the overall direction is set. We're cutting dead weight starting with... He gestured toward me. Well, you all know where we're starting. A few people laughed. I smiled politely and kept taking notes. Alex, Dad said, addressing me directly for the first time. Do you have anything to say? Any defense of your department's performance? I looked up, meeting his eyes. No, sir. You've presented the numbers accurately. He blinked, thrown off by my lack of fight. No excuses. No explanations about how your work was undervalued or misunderstood. The numbers speak for themselves, I said calmly. Dad studied me for a moment, suspicion flickering across his face. Then he nodded. At least you're not delusional. That's something. He turned back to the room. All right, I'll send the full restructuring proposal by end of day. We'll reconvene Friday to finalize. The conference room door opened. Gerald Kim, our CFO, walked in carrying a thick folder and looking stressed. He was in his 50s, had been with the company for 15 years, and never interrupted meetings unless it was critical. Gerald, Dad said, irritated. We're in the middle of... I know, sir. I apologize. Gerald's eyes swept the room and landed on me. Something unreadable passed across his face. But we have a significant problem with the restructuring plan. What problem? Dad demanded. A legal one, Gerald said carefully. He set the folder on the table. According to corporate bylaws, any restructuring that affects more than 20% of the workforce requires approval from shareholders holding at least 75% of company stock. Dad frowned. I have 63%. Helen and I. That's not enough, Gerald interrupted gently. Not for a change of this magnitude. You're eliminating 4 departments and 37 positions. That's 29% of total headcount. It triggers the supermajority requirement. The room went silent. That's a technicality, Sandra Kemp said quickly. We can structure it as phased reductions instead of a single restructuring. It's not a technicality, it's corporate law, Gerald said firmly. And the SEC has been auditing tech companies for exactly this kind of workaround. We can't risk it. Dad's jaw tightened. Fine. What about the other shareholders? The legacy investors, the employee stock options. Combined, they represent about 10%, Gerald said. Even if you got unanimous approval from all of them, which you won't, you'd only reach 73%. You need 75. That's impossible, Raymond Pierce said. If Marcus has 63 and others have 10, that's only 73% total. Where's the other 27%? Gerald didn't answer immediately. He opened the folder and pulled out a document, the official shareholder registry, I realized. The same one I'd been reviewing quarterly for 5 years. That's what I came to discuss, Gerald said slowly. The ownership structure is more complicated than most people realize. Dad stepped forward, snatching the registry. What are you talking about? I know exactly who owns what. Helen and I have controlling interest. Everything else is minor stakes. That was true, Gerald said. Until about 6 years ago. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. 6 years ago? Dad repeated. What happened 6 years ago? Gerald looked at me again. Alex turned 18. Everyone turned to stare at me. I kept my expression neutral, my pen still in hand. What does Alex turning 18 have to do with anything? Sandra demanded. Everything, Gerald said quietly. He pulled out another document. When Alex was born, Marcus's mother, the company founder's widow, established a trust. She put 25% of her personal shares into it, designated for her grandson. The trust was structured to mature when Alex turned 18. Dad's face had gone pale. That trust was dissolved. Mom's shares reverted to me when she died. No, Gerald said gently. They didn't. The trust was irrevocable. When your mother passed away, the trust remained intact. When Alex turned 18, those shares transferred automatically. 25%, Raymond said slowly. That gives Alex 25%? It did, Gerald confirmed. But that's not the whole story. He pulled out more documents, spreading them across the table. Over the past 6 years, Alex has been quietly purchasing shares on the open market. Every time an employee exercised stock options and sold, every time a legacy investor wanted to cash out, Alex bought them. Dad grabbed the papers, his hands shaking. That's impossible. Where would he get that kind of money? From dividends on his existing shares, Gerald said. 25% of company profits for 6 years generates substantial capital. Alex reinvested every penny into acquiring more equity. You're telling me my son has been buying shares behind my back? Dad's voice rose. And you didn't tell me? The transactions were legal and properly filed, Gerald said defensively. Alex wasn't hiding anything. He filed all required SEC disclosures, worked through proper brokers, followed every regulation. I assumed you knew. You received the same quarterly shareholder reports that I do. I don't read those line by line, Dad snapped. I know who the major shareholders are. Me, Helen, some minor players. Alex isn't a minor player anymore, Gerald interrupted. He pulled out the current registry, the one certified this morning. As of today, Alex Donovan owns 73% of Donovan Technologies. The silence was absolute. Sandra Kemp laughed nervously. That's not possible. Marcus just said he owns 63%. The math doesn't work. The math works perfectly if Marcus doesn't actually own 63%, Gerald said. He looked at Dad. When was the last time you personally verified your holdings? Dad's face had gone from pale to red. I don't need to verify. I know what I own. Helen and I control. You control 18%, Gerald said quietly. Helen has 12. That's 30% combined. No, Dad said flatly. No, that's wrong. I inherited 43% from my father. Helen and I each added 10 through purchases over the years. That's 63. You inherited 43, Gerald confirmed. But you sold shares twice. In 2015, you sold 15% to finance the acquisition of CloudSync systems. In 2019, you sold another 10% to cover losses from the Dataflow investment that went bad. Dad's mouth opened and closed. Those were bought back. I repurchased those shares. You tried, Gerald said. But you were outbid both times. The buyer paid premium prices above market rate. You couldn't match it. Who bought them? Sandra demanded. Gerald gestured toward me. Alex did. Every eye in the room fixed on me. I set down my pen and met their stares calmly. You, Dad whispered. You bought my shares? I bought available shares on the open market, I corrected quietly. At fair market value through proper channels. The same way any investor would. With my money. Dad shouted. With dividends from shares my mother gave you. With my money, I said. From my shares. Which generated dividends that I invested. That's called smart capital management. Raymond Pierce was pulling up numbers on his tablet. If Alex has 73%, that means Marcus and Helen's 30% combined. He's been the majority shareholder for years? Since he was 22, Gerald confirmed. 4 years ago Alex crossed 51%. Every quarter since I've sent the shareholder reports showing his growing stake. I assumed everyone knew. I didn't read them. Dad exploded. I trusted you to tell me if something important. He cut himself off, realization dawning. You knew. You've known for 4 years that my son was the majority shareholder and you didn't tell me. It was in the reports, Gerald said carefully. I documented everything properly. I assumed if you wanted details you'd ask. Assumed, Dad repeated dangerously. Also, Gerald added, his voice even quieter, Alex asked me not to make a big announcement. He said he wanted to learn the business first, understand operations, prove himself before revealing his position. Prove himself? Sandra said incredulously. He owns the company. Which is exactly why I wanted to prove myself, I said, speaking up for the first time. I didn't want people treating me differently because of ownership. I wanted to see how the company really worked. How decisions were made. How people were treated when they thought I was powerless. Dad stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Strategic development. That whole department. Was my idea, I confirmed. I asked Gerald to create it. Low profile, small budget, no direct reports. A position where I could observe operations without drawing attention. The proposals that were never implemented? Raymond asked. Were implemented, I said. Just not under my name. The shift to cloud-based infrastructure 3 years ago? That was my proposal. Gerald presented it to the board as coming from an external consultant. Same with the customer retention program that increased renewal rates by 32%. And the supplier diversification strategy that saved $4 million last year. Jennifer Walsh was scrolling through her tablet. The consultant reports. Those were you? I hired actual consultants to polish the proposals and present them, I explained. I didn't want credit. I wanted to see if the ideas worked. Why? Dad's voice was hoarse. I looked at him steadily. Because you would have rejected them if you knew they came from me. You've spent 5 years telling everyone I'm useless. That I'm dead weight. That I'm only here because of nepotism. How would you have reacted if your useless son started proposing company strategies? He didn't answer. Let me guess, I continued. You would have dismissed them without reading. Told me to stay in my lane. Maybe even used it as more evidence that I didn't understand business. I paused. So I kept quiet. I learned. I implemented ideas through proper channels. And I watched. Watched what? Sandra asked. How the company really operates, I said. Who's actually competent? Who's just good at office politics? Who cares about the work? Who's just protecting their position? I looked at Sandra. You've been trying to get Dad to eliminate strategic development for 3 years. Not because it's inefficient, but because you want its budget for operations. Sandra's face flushed. That's not. I've read your emails, I said calmly. To Gerald, to Raymond, to anyone who'll listen. Useless department. Waste of resources. You've been lobbying against me personally because you think eliminating my position makes you look decisive. You had no right to read my emails. I have every right, I said. I'm the majority shareholder. I have access to all company communications. I turned to Raymond. You've been selling company information to competitors. Nothing classified, nothing illegal, just strategic insights to the CTO at NextGen Systems. Your college roommate, I believe. Raymond went pale. That's not, we just talk shop. You've told him about 3 product launches before public announcement, I said. Small timing advantages that let NextGen position themselves better. And not quite illegal. Just deeply unethical. I looked around the table. I've spent 5 years watching. Learning who actually deserves to be here. Who's performing. Who's coasting. Who's actively sabotaging. My eyes landed on Dad. And who's making decisions based on ego instead of data. Dad's hands were clenched on the table. You think you know better than me? I built this company. Grandpa built this company, I corrected. You inherited it. And you've done well, I'll give you that. Revenue's up, market share is stable. But you've also made serious mistakes. CloudSync acquisition? Cost us $40 million and we shut it down within 2 years. Data flow investment? Total loss. The vendor consolidation last year that you pushed through over Gerald's objections? It saved money short-term but created supply chain vulnerabilities that almost shut down production last month. Gerald nodded reluctantly. That's accurate. You want to talk about dead weight? I continued. Let's talk about real performance metrics. Strategic development. My department. Cost $2 million over 5 years. Your bad acquisitions and investments cost us $63 million. But you're cutting me because I'm an easy target. Because firing your son makes you look tough and decisive. Dad's face was bright red. Everything I did was to grow the company. Everything you did was to prove you're as good as Grandpa, I said quietly. That's what this has always been about. You inherited a successful company and you're terrified of being seen as just a caretaker. So you make bold moves, take big risks, sometimes without proper analysis. Because bold is better than careful in your mind. Because you'd rather fail big than succeed small. The room was silent. This restructuring? I gestured at the presentation still on the screen. Half of it makes sense. The other half is eliminating people who've disagreed with you recently. Jenny Walsh pushed back on the marketing rebrand. Raymond questioned the R&D budget. Sandra just wants their budgets. But you're not making cuts based on performance. You're making cuts based on control. You don't know what you're talking about, Dad said, but his voice had lost its power. I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said. I've been studying business since I was 12. Got my MBA at 23. Fully paid for by my trust fund, by the way, not company money. I've read every book Grandpa recommended, studied every strategy you implemented, analyzed every decision this company has made since I was old enough to understand quarterly reports. I stood up slowly. I'm not here because of nepotism, Dad. I'm here because Grandma knew what she was doing when she set up that trust. She saw how you operated. She loved you, but she also understood that you'd never voluntarily share control. So she made sure I'd have a stake. A real stake. Not 5 or 10% that you could ignore. 25% that would mature when I was old enough to do something with it. She had no right, Dad started. She had every right, I interrupted. They were her shares. Her company originally. She and Grandpa built it together. And she chose to ensure the next generation had real ownership. Not a token position. Not a pity job. Actual power. Gerald cleared his throat. For the record, Alex's grandmother discussed the trust structure with me before she died. She was very specific that Alex should have enough ownership to protect the company's legacy if it became necessary. Protect it from what? Dad demanded. From me. From short-sighted decisions, I said. From ego-driven moves that prioritize looking successful over being successful. From exactly the kind of restructuring you announced today, cutting people not because of performance but because you want to look decisive. I picked up the shareholder registry Gerald had brought. You were going to eliminate strategic development. Fire me, basically. Did you run retention analysis? Calculate the impact on company morale? Consider what it signals to fire the founder's grandson publicly. It signals accountability. Dad said. It signals desperation, I countered. It tells the market that Donovan Technologies is struggling badly enough that even family isn't safe. Stock would drop 12 to 15% within a week. I ran the projections. Raymond was nodding slowly. He's right. The optics would be terrible. Plus, I continued, you were going to consolidate R&D and engineering under Sandra's operations umbrella. Which sounds efficient until you realize that operations focuses on cost-cutting while R&D needs investment freedom. You'd strangle innovation within 6 months. Sandra started to object, but Raymond cut her off. Also true. I've been fighting that consolidation for 3 years. I looked around the table. Here's what's actually going to happen. The restructuring is cancelled. Strategic development stays as is. Sandra, your attempt to expand operations control is denied. Raymond, you're on notice about the competitor communications. Stop it or you're gone. Jenny, good job pushing back on bad ideas. Keep doing that. You can't just, Sandra started. I can, I said calmly. I own 73%. I have complete decision-making authority. This entire meeting? Dad needed my approval for all of it. The restructuring, the cuts, the new direction. None of it happens without my signature. I turned to Gerald. Correct. Gerald nodded. Correct. Any major structural changes require approval from shareholders holding 75%. But for most operational decisions, simple majority rules. Alex can approve or reject virtually anything. Dad sank into his chair, all the fight drained out of him. You let me announce an entire restructuring knowing I couldn't implement it? I let you reveal your real priorities, I said. I wanted to see what you'd do when you thought you had complete control. How you'd treat people. What decisions you'd make. I paused. You confirmed everything I suspected. You're a good operator, Dad. But you're not a good leader. You don't value people. You don't listen to disagreement. And you're willing to sacrifice anything, including your own son, to maintain your image. Alex, Dad said quietly. His voice was broken. I'm your father. I know, I said. Which is why this is hard. But Grandma gave me this responsibility for a reason. Not to hurt you. To protect what she and Grandpa built. I gathered my materials. Here's what happens next. Gerald, schedule a proper board meeting for Friday. We're going to review operations thoroughly and make strategic decisions based on data, not ego. Everyone at this table will present their actual performance metrics, and we'll make decisions from there. What about the CEO position? Sandra asked. I looked at Dad. He looked old suddenly. Tired. Dad stays as CEO, I said. He's good at operations, at external relationships, at the day-to-day running of the company. But major strategic decisions go through me. Think of it as checks and balances. And if I refuse? Dad asked quietly. Then you resign and I appoint someone else, I said bluntly. But I'd rather not do that. Despite everything, you're good at your job. You're just bad at respecting other people. We can work with that if you're willing to change. Dad looked at me for a long moment. When did you become so calculating? I learned from you, I said. The difference is I use calculation to protect people, not to eliminate them. I headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Dad? Strategic development isn't going anywhere. In fact, I'm expanding it. We're going to focus on long-term company sustainability, employee development, and ethical growth strategies. All the things you consider soft until they cost you money. Alex, Gerald called out. You'll need to sign off on the quarterly projections by tomorrow. Send them to my office, I said. My actual office. I think it's time I moved out of the strategic development corner and into something more appropriate for the majority shareholder. I left them sitting in stunned silence. In the hallway, I finally let myself breathe. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline, not fear. 6 years of preparation, 5 years of watching and learning, one perfectly timed reveal. My phone buzzed. A text from Gerald. Your grandmother would be proud. Oh, I'm proud. I smiled and typed back. Thanks for keeping the secret. I kept the documentation accurate. You kept the vision alive. We make a good team. Behind me, through the glass walls, I could see the meeting dissolving into chaos. Sandra was arguing with Raymond. Jenny was on her phone, probably calling her team. Dad sat alone at the head of the table, staring at the shareholder registry like it was written in a foreign language. Tomorrow we'd start fixing things. Properly analyzing departments. Making decisions based on performance, not politics. building the kind of company Grandma and Grandpa had envisioned, one that valued both results and people. But today I'd proven that dead weight isn't about job titles or family connections. It's about who actually understands what makes a company worth running. And Marcus Donovan had just learned that his useless son understood it better than he ever had. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Gerald. Board meeting Friday at 9 a.m. Should I reserve the head seat for you? I thought about it, then typed, no. Dad can keep the head seat. I'll sit where I always have. Let him learn that power isn't about where you sit. You're definitely your grandmother's grandson. I smiled and headed toward the elevators. I had 5 years of strategic development proposals to unbury and properly implement. A company to steer toward sustainable growth. And a father to teach that charity isn't about giving people jobs they don't deserve. It's about giving people the chance to prove what they're really capable of. Even when everyone assumes they're dead weight. Especially then.